The Only Good Priest. Tom and Scott Mystery, Book 3. Author Mark Richard Zubro. St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 4. Late that morning I drove to Scott's. I parked my black pickup truck among the BMWs, Cadillacs, and limousines. I greeted Alfred, the doorman, and rode the penthouse elevator up. I spent an hour waiting for Scott in the music room, listening to the Minneapolis concert CD by Ed Trickett, Ann Mayo, Muir, and Gordon Bach. For lunch, we grabbed a corned beef sandwich at the corner deli and hurried to an appointment at the Gay Tribune. Their office existed in the hot new area of town along the Halsted Street Strip, between North Avenue and Fullerton. Inside, chaos reigned, broken glass from the shattered pitcher's window. Scrunched underfoot, plastic and metal computer fragments lay strewn over the landscape. Heaps and drifts of paper continued to cascade as people sifted through them. All the desks set upright, but the drawers were dumped out onto the floor. Monica sat on top of a stepladder, cigarette holder clamped in her lips. Youthful male and female underlings scurried about. Occasionally she'd be asked a question. She rarely did more than point. A phone rang, and Monica picked a cordless model off the top of an 8-foot bookcase. We heard no part of her conversation. She wore dark blue bib overalls with a pink silk blouse underneath, along with Air Jordan tennis shoes. No matching purse inside. A kid who couldn't have been more than 14 demanded to know what we wanted. She wore orange plastic glasses, baggy pants, a mohawk haircut, and a paint-spattered t-shirt that said, "Eat the whales." I asked to talk to Monica. She said, "Mom's too busy. Can't you see we had a break-in? Unless you're cops." She peered at us. "Not ugly enough. Fuck off." Only 12 feet wide, the room ran the length of the building, maybe 50 feet deep. Monica caught sight of us from her perch halfway down the room with languid grace, but surprising rapidity. She descended the ladder and closed the distance between us. The child stalked off without a word or look passing between them. "The third-floor office is undamaged," Monica said. "We can talk there." She led the way up narrow stairs. Large holes gapped in the walls as we climbed. She pointed to them. "From the last break-in, not this one." The glimpse I got of the second floor made the first look pristine. They hadn't started cleaning here. The attackers covered the walls and mounds of debris with splotches of white and green paint. If you could cut it, they had it. If it was breakable, it was in pieces. She led us into an elegant third-floor office. "Quadruple locked and burglar-proof up here," she said. "Because of Priscilla living in back, we put in extra protection. It's on order for downstairs." Photographs by J.E.B. lined one of the walls, and the fourth had a picture window that looked out on Halsted Street. Monica pointed to several indentations in the picture window. "Almost shot up the place a couple of months ago. Fortunately, I had them install bulletproof glass when I moved in." You can't be too careful when you're a gay businesswoman. At least I know some stupid kid with his dad's assault rifle can't blow me away. We stepped around a cantilevered desk, crafted of rosewood burl with inlaid zinc zigzags. She seated us in comfortable chairs around a glass-topped coffee table. On the corner of the table, nearest to where I sat, was the Cunt coloring book by T. Corrine, with an open box of Crayolas carefully placed to let the looker observe the cover completely. "You've had break-ins before?" I asked. "Twice. Although this is the worst, I'm planning to make it the last, and today is deadline. We'll have some computers working soon. The paper will be out on time." "Who did it?" I asked. She pulled a cigarette from a cookie jar on top of the coffee table and silver cigarette holder from a clip on the side. She organized these and lit the cigarette before she answered. "Who knows? Jealous lesbians, envious gay men, threatened straights. I put out of business. This is a sideline, a hobby for me, but somebody's going to pay." She spoke very calmly for all her threatening words. Her violet eyes met ours as she puffed contentedly. "You're here about Sebastian." She didn't wait for confirmation. Her eyes got misty. He knew people, understood them, not in some saintly, otherworldly way, but like a real person, looking at real foibles and major character flaws, and Yet he still cared about them. He's the first professionally religious person, priest, minister, nun, whatever, I ever met who was actually a holy person. A good, kind, loving Christian person, and some bastard murdered him. The glint of tears appeared in her eyes. How can you be sure it was murder? I know bullshit from cops when I see it. Plus, my contact in the chancery is very reliable. Like I said last night, we need to talk to your source, I said. I'm trying to get him to agree. I'll need more time. We told her about Sebastian testing positive for HIV antibodies. Test can't be right. He didn't have AIDS. I'd know. He couldn't have hidden it from me. Maybe he didn't know, Scott said. Possible, she conceded. She mushed out her cigarette in an ashtray large enough to hold half of Lake Chicago. She sighed. You're here because you found out I went downstairs that Sunday, stated, not asked. I figured with you talking to the troops, it'd come out. I am not universally loved. I liked her melodious and soothing voice. I went down to talk to him about getting rid of Bartholomew as treasurer. The man is a menace. She recounted a string of the old man's sins as treasurer. I'm a businesswoman, she finished. I can't stand incompetence, no matter how kind we should be to the old coot. Sebastian had refused, saying the old man needed to feel wanted. The group would survive any blunders he made. It wasn't as if Bartholomew were stealing from them. My last words to him were petty, harsh ones about a totally unimportant issue. She sighed. Life's a bitch. After a few moments, she continued, I've never met a more powerful or strong-willed person than Sebastian, yet he never raised his voice, put himself forward, or joined a faction. She'd neither seen nor heard anyone else making their way to see the priest that day. I explained about trying to find who Sebastian met at the bar, who he might be, and why Sebastian met him. Monica thought, inserted another cigarette in the holder, and began puffing. All I know is that if anybody ever talked about going for a drink, he always suggested Roscoe's. We went a few times. He never met anybody when I was there. It wasn't much, but that's all she gave us. I got a photograph of Father Sebastian from her. I wanted to show it at Roscoe's. A slim chance, but at least a place to start. Monica had to get back to the paper. She told us she'd send Priscilla up to talk to us. She picked up the phone receiver, punched several buttons, and requested Priscilla's presence. A few minutes later, Priscilla stomped in. She did not sit. She gripped the back of a chair hard enough to turn her knuckles white. What is it? She demanded after Monica left. I've got work to do. Did you know Sebastian tested positive for the AIDS antibodies, I asked. The old bastard had AIDS. I don't believe it. He was so moral. I can't believe he'd ever have sex with anybody. Who'd want to? Still, he was the only politically correct male I knew. Don't know how he pulled that off. Why'd you go downstairs to see Sebastian on Sunday? The question set her off. For 5 minutes, she berated us as incompetent males and unwanted outsiders. Scott got up and walked to the window halfway through the tirade. When she paused for breath, I said, Did you kill him? She switched instantly from macho pig insults to deadly calm. You heard of lesbians for freedom and dignity? I nodded. We don't put up with insults from men. It wasn't an insult, just a question. She waved a finger in my face. You'll be a sorry fucker, she said, and stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I refuse to deal with that shit, Scott said, coming back from the window. We walked downstairs. The cleaners had reached the second floor by now, but it still looked to be unusable for days. Downstairs, a few computers hummed. Repair trucks sat outside. Tie-clad men peered into the insides of terminally ill machines. Repairmen in hours. That was power and money at work. We'd promised to pick up Bartholomew at 2. He had given us his phone number and address the day before. We called ahead to make sure he was home. No answer. We drove over. Bartholomew lived above a straight bar on Lincoln Avenue, just south of Diversey. No Bartholomew waiting outside as he'd promised. The day before, we banged on the downstairs door and pressed the buzzer. Still no answer. We tried the first floor tavern behind the bar. A bald little guy with a towel draped over his left shoulder had his bookie receipt spread out on the bar top. A cigarette with a 1-inch ash dangled from his lips. I watched him as he deftly moved his beer glass 2 seconds before the ash dropped. The ash received a swipe with a fist, and the beer returned to its rightful place. "Help yuz," he said, not looking up. We stood on the other side of the bar, waiting. Finally, he looked up at us. He gasped. "Scott Carpenter!" His cigarette plopped into his beer. "Whatever you want, it's on the house," he said. "We're looking for the old man upstairs, Bartholomew Northridge. Know him?" "You mean the cranky old fruit?" Scott tapped him gently on his flabby chest. "You mean the kind old gay man," he said softly. The bartender looked at the finger and smiled weakly. "Yeah, sure, sorry. Who's prejudiced?" "Have you seen him?" I asked. "No. Should be up there. Most days he stops in here around noon, not always. With only a little prodding from sports hero Scott Carpenter, the guy gave us his key. Again, he offered us any free drink in the house." "Another time," Scott told him. A long, single flight of linoleum-covered steps led up to Bartholomew's room. The linoleum might have been bright green upon installation 50 years ago, but no longer. We called from the outside the door, but no one answered. Unlocking the door and entering, we found Bartholomew at the kitchen table staring into a cold cup of coffee. It took little more than a glance to take in his whole apartment. His living space depressed me. The walls were bare, everything was clean and Spartan. A few carefully mended kitchen chairs sat under a card table. The single bed had an old army blanket tucked in with military precision. As its only covering, a stack of gay porno magazines peeked from under the side of the bed. 2 library books, Greenberg's The Construction of Homosexuality and After the Ball by Kirk and Manston, sat on the nightstand. The only light in the room came from a floor lamp any self-respecting garage sale would reject. An open doorway revealed a spotless John. We raised 2 film-covered eyes to us. "I can't," he whispered. I stayed in the doorway. Scott sat in a creaking chair across from Bartholomew. He took one gnarled old hand from around the coffee cup and held it between his own. "What's wrong, Bartholomew?" he murmured. "I'm scared," the old man mumbled. "Scared I'll catch it. Afraid to die." Patiently, Scott explained how you can or can't catch AIDS. He added, "We're all afraid to die, Bartholomew. You can't stop living out of fear. You have to volunteer to honor Father Sebastian's memory, if nothing else." The old man stared out the window at the brick wall of the building next door for the longest time. Scott waited, unmoving and silent. His hands around the other man's gave warmth and courage. The old man's pained eyes met Scott's. The deep blue lamps of my lover radiated their warmth. "I need my coat," Bartholomew said. We walked him into the clinic. A bright-eyed young man, chattering happily, took Bartholomew from us and led him away, as he always did. When he stopped at the clinic, Scott checked the roster of people with AIDS in area hospitals. He took notes on several new ones and talked to the volunteer to be sure they'd update his list. Scott visited every person with AIDS in every Chicago hospital, as long as they didn't refuse to see him. As we left, Bartholomew rushed back to us. "I need to talk to the 2 of you. I know something about—" He broke off as an attractive young attendant walked up to us. He smiled at Bartholomew. "I have a blind person with AIDS who needs to be read to this week. We can begin your training later. For now, we have 1,000,000 envelopes we need help with stuffing." He gave the old man a genuinely warm and caring smile. Captivated, Bartholomew let himself be led off. "I'll call you tonight," he said over his shoulder as he walked away. Before we left, we phoned ahead to the 23rd District Police Station, trying to get hold of the Chicago cop Frank had mentioned. He was in. We drove up Halstead to the station. They could have used this place for the rundown precinct station of any urban TV cop show. The cops readily recognized Scott. He signed autographs and chatted happily. The commander came down and greeted him. We got the cook's tour. When done, he asked if there was anything specific he could do for us. We asked for the man Frank had named, Paul Turner, with a minimum of curiosity. Satisfied by our bland replies and his desire to call everybody he knew to tell about meeting Scott, he led us to a small room on the 2nd floor. The door stood wide open to reveal a room cluttered with 6 desks, bookcases, chairs, and barely enough room to walk between all of them. Heaps of paper covered the top of each desk, with only a tiny square open where its occupant could lean an elbow. One man sat in the room, maybe 30, nice looking in a shambling, rugged way. He was the only cop who hadn't clustered eagerly around Scott. The commander introduced him as Detective Paul Turner, the guy we wanted. He told Turner to treat us well, with a final handshake for Scott. He left us. Turner smiled, shook hands, said it was nice to meet both of us. He wore a dull blue tie and a white shirt and non-regulation blue pants. Flung over the back of his chair was a herringbone gray coat that sort of matched his outfit. He wore his shoulder holster and gun. He removed files from 2 chairs and placed them carefully in order on the floor. I guessed that after we vacated these seats, he would replace the materials exactly as he had found them. Turner had thick, black, wiry hair, a 1/4 inch longer than a brush cut, and at 2:30 in the afternoon, he had a 5 o'clock shadow. He rested his elbows on the table, cupped his chin in his hands, and let his brown eyes gaze at us. If he used that innocent look on me and I was guilty, I'd confess immediately. I explained our problem from the beginning, leaving out innuendo, sticking to the facts as much as possible. I talked for 10 minutes. His attention never wavered. When I finished, he said, "If I hadn't talked to Frank Murphy, I'd toss you both out of here on your asses. I assume you only got this far because nobody in this town would dare question Scott Carpenter or anybody with him. Shitty police procedure, but not hard to understand." At times, I had to lean forward to catch his words, spoken in a soft baritone. "I prefer rules and regulations. You get a dead body. The blues arrive, secure the crime scene, lab folks show up, take pictures, file reports, detectives ask questions, interview people. Nice, neat, orderly. You 2 guys are not in the regular order. I think you found some interesting stuff, but I'm off the case. I'm not supposed to care." I described Frank's comments on those in charge. "He shouldn't have told you, no matter how much he trusts you. I like Frank. Maybe it's easier to trust people in the suburbs." "You don't believe us?" Scott asked. He smiled briefly at Scott. "Belief isn't my problem at this point. Power and the lack of it are. I'm off the case. I ask why. I'm told to go to work on my other cases. I press the commander. He presses back harder. So I shut up and wonder who's got the clout to push him. Frank tells me documents have disappeared. My sources confirm this. I tried to get official access to the files. No dice. I tried people I know. Nothing. Nobody connected with this case will say word one. Not my best contacts. I've been a detective 5 years. I don't need a roadmap to see where this is going." He shrugged. "Now you guys show up outside of regulations and orders. Normally, I'd be real interested, but now I've got no questions to ask. It's not my job or my problem. What you told me adds up to official zip. I could pull in these people, some of whom could squawk real loud. Then I'm in deep shit for what? A famous baseball player, a concerned school teacher, and a dead priest? You guys are out of your league. I'm out of my league. My best advice is, forget it, boys. If the case has this kind of pull behind it, my guess is people could get very nasty about you poking around." He twined his hands together, placed them behind his head, and slouched back. No dampness under his armpits. "Do I agree with you?" "Doesn't matter. Can I do anything for you?" "Nope." "Sorry." "Would what you say hold up in court?" "No." "Is somebody covering up?" "Obviously." "Should you keep your noses out of it?" "You bet." He put his arms down and placed his hands on the table, palms up. "What else can I do for you?" "What kind of cop are you?" Scott demanded. "Don't you know we're telling the truth?" The cop smiled. "I think everything you told me was the truth." "Then what the fuck?" Scott vented his frustration. The cop never took his eyes away from Scott's face, listening as if he heard your deepest secrets and everything you said. When Scott ran down, the cop said, "I'm more frustrated about this than you are." I believed him. "I deal in real things, those I can change. This is one I can't. I'm sorry." Simple honesty and clear brown eyes. "If I were on the case, I'd tell you to fuck off as nosy busybodies, even if your best friend was the chief of police." He wasn't threatening or being cruel, just expressing his method of working and dealing with amateurs. "Do me one favor." I nodded. If you find anything out, let me know. If they find you dead, I'll have it started on an investigation. If you think we're in danger, why won't you help us? I asked. I don't know if you're in danger, but I don't like the smell of this whole business. Warning you to be careful is all I can do, he shrugged. His shoulders were broad and well-muscled. We got up to leave. Police business over, he said. My sons would never forgive me if I didn't get Scott Carpenter's autograph. You better sign one for me, too. That was refreshing. Usually an adult wouldn't admit it was for him. He walked us to the door. He took out his wallet, pulled out a card, and gave it to me. This is my home phone number, too. I hope you won't need to use it. We thanked him and left. We drove back to River's Edge for negotiations with the Board of Education. I expected the meeting to last until all hours of the morning. I wanted to confront Clarence the creep, but it would have to wait. The lawyer for their side took 15 minutes to deliver the message to the lawyer for our side. The board's basic response to our last offer: fuck you, go to hell. The mediator part of the process required in all Illinois school district labor disputes. Wrung her hands and requested more meetings. We said bullshit. In 15 more minutes, we acted on the authorization of our members and our vote of Saturday and told them we were ready to strike. I was home by 9. I ranted about asshole administrators for 15 minutes. Scott's heard the drill several thousand times before. He let me run on, then suggested we confront Clarence. We didn't call. We drove straight to the rectory. Nobody home. We sat in the car while I fumed. Scott suggested we visit the Manhattan woman friend. Even though it was nearly 10, I decided to try it. This wasn't a social call, and maybe a late evening confrontation with possible exposure of this relationship might shake loose some information. Half an hour later, we strode up the walk. The almost spring-like 40-degree temperatures had continued. The woman who met us at the door wore blue jeans and a heavy black sweater. She carried a sleeping baby. We got a glimpse of Father Clarence in faded jeans and gray sweater, lounging on the couch, feet up, gazing at a TV program. He looked in our direction and abruptly sat up straight. We told the woman we wanted to talk to Father Clarence. Let them in, he called. Inside, the woman began to demand to know who we were and what we wanted. Clarence calmed her down. He asked us all to sit. Our voices had waked the baby. Its cries rose quickly to a full bellow. I presumed the woman to be the mother, probably around 25. She seemed accustomed to the baby, but for whatever reason her attention torn and her home threatened. Her mothering attempts were for naught. The baby squalled louder. Clarence took the kid, comfortable as he seemed with the child. The crying didn't stop. She's teething, the mother explained, and your presence doesn't help. It took me an hour to get her quiet. While she directed her anger at me, Scott took the baby from Clarence. The kid stopped crying almost instantly. The man's a wizard. How? The woman reached for her kid, then stopped. The lack of noise eased everybody's tension. Clarence turned off the TV and invited us to sit. He looked like the young executive at home for the evening in pre-faded designer jeans, cut to fit his slender figure. He might work out a day or two a week at the health club. Short hair, cut fashionably correct. The apartment had white walls with a few famed posters, all pictured cats in varying stages of cuteness. Burning them would be my first act if it were my place. I could live without cats. The furniture felt comfortable in an overstuffed Kmart way. We pushed Clarence for answers and information. For 15 minutes, he fended us off. Finally, frustrated and feeling rotten about doing it, I used the threat of telling about his liaison with the woman and child to get him to talk to us. At that, he rose and stomped about the room, raging at us. I felt guilt, but I wanted information. He finally sat down, red and puffing. I waited a few minutes and began again. You're a priest. His shoulders slumped. He spoke in a dull monotone. We're married, he said. Huh? I managed. The woman took his hand and held it gently. We're in love, she said. Who are you? I said. Mrs. Clarence Rogers. I saw doubt and worry in his look. I always wondered what I'd do if this ever happened, he said. More to himself than to us. He looked from Scott to me. I'm not ashamed of what I've done. Clarence told us they'd been married 5 years. She had been a parishioner in his first parish. He didn't feel bound by the outdated precepts of dried-up old men in Rome. I do a great deal of good as a priest. I won't give it up. I won't give up my sexuality either. How does this work? Scott asked. I stay at the rectory only when necessary. I leave after working hours and get back before early mass. We're very discreet here. I found the hypocrisy of his lifestyle fascinating. Father Sebastian knew all about it, covered for me numerous times with the chancery. A good guy, but very out of step with the times. When I learned he performed fag masses, I interrupted. Don't say fag. You don't like it? Complain to the Vatican, he snapped. I don't like it, and I'll beat the living shit out of you and mail you to the Vatican if you say it again, Scott said. Clarence opened his mouth, I thought, to make a smart comeback. He stared from one to the other of us. His wife patted his arm and said, Claire, please. What if you're caught? Scott said. They don't burn people at the stake anymore, Clarence said, as I'm sure you two appreciate. A gay couple or a priest led astray by a woman a few centuries ago might have caused executions. Today, who cares? Figuring out we're a gay couple after our comment was not a major trick. We spent 15 minutes arguing the merits of what my nephews overheard. He continued to insist that Jerry had misunderstood. His wife wanted to know why we wouldn't believe him. I let it go and switched to asking if he knew anything about Sebastian's private life, especially if he had a lover. Any hints at all? Maybe odd phone calls? I never paid much attention to the old guy. You get odd phone calls in a rectory all the time, he said. I thought our presence would be a threat enough to Clarence's lifestyle to get him to open up. Not a chance. After the initial worry, he remained as cool and arrogant as if the Pope had performed his marriage. I asked if he'd at least let us look around Sebastian's room. He refused, saying the diocese took care of that. He told us nothing helpful. Arrogant snot, Scott said in the car as we walked to my house. From the garage, I heard the phone ring. I hurried in, expecting to be Bartholomew. Instead, Neil announced that the Faith building had burned to the ground. Worse, they couldn't find Bartholomew. He told several people he needed to stop by the Faith offices. He'd borrowed the key from Neil. We rushed to the city. We found Neil in a cluster of people at the corner of School Street and Clark. He saw us and hurried over. They found a body, he announced. I'm afraid. I tried calling his place. No one answered. We hurried to Bartholomew's apartment. We got the bartender to give us the key again. In the kitchen, the few dishes and glasses were carefully arranged in the cupboards. In the refrigerator, everything had frozen. Neil explained that Bartholomew had continuous battles with his landlord about fixing things in his apartment. The landlord refused to believe the refrigerator froze everything. Bartholomew took the milk out every night so it would thaw in time for him to put it in his cereal. In the morning, the freezer compartment contained 5 Weight Watchers spaghetti dinners bought on sale at a Jewel grocery store. His windows looked out on garbage cans in an alley. I thought accountants made decent money, Scott said. Neil laughed harshly. Bartholomew was a victim of history. Neil explained that the man we feared dead in the fire had been dishonorably discharged from the Navy during World War II, caught by an ensign, giving blowjobs to half the crew on a submarine. And he had been unlucky enough in the early 50s to be entrapped by a cop in a Lincoln Park washroom. A bitter and lonely man, shit on by society, with every right to scream in agony. Mercifully, he never served in prison. With an arrest record and dishonorable discharge, he found it hard to get work. You know, he watched the gay pride parade every year. Each time I tried to get him to be in it, he always refused, but every year he stood at the corner of Surf and Broadway, clapping and cheering for every group, float, whatever. It became a sort of joke over the years. He stood and clapped as the world passed him by. Why was he there tonight? Scott asked. I don't know, Neil said. It wasn't unusual for him to ask for the keys. He was always forgetting something. His hat, gloves, Neil sighed. When I got there, the whole place was engulfed in flames. The only thing I could get a cop to tell me was that the fire spread out awful fast. Arson, I said. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.